The smell of fresh coffee and bacon grease filled the air as Maya wiped down table number 7 for what felt like the 100th time that morning. Her white sneakers squeaked against the checkered linoleum floor of Rose's diner, a sound she'd grown so used to that it had become the soundtrack to her life. 3 years she'd been here, 3 years of taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and dodging the occasional rude customer who thought waiting tables was beneath them. But Maya had a secret. Something that made the long shifts and aching feet worth it. Something that kept her coming back to this little diner on the corner of 5th and Main. Even when other restaurants offered better pay and shorter hours, in the far corner of the diner, pushed against the wall between 2 faded photographs of the town's founding fathers, sat an old upright piano. Its wood was scratched and worn, the kind of honey-colored oak that had seen better days. Most of the keys had turned yellow with age, and if you pressed middle C too hard, it would stick for a few seconds before popping back up with a soft thunk. Everyone else saw it as just another piece of furniture. The owner, Mrs. Chen, had inherited it from the previous owner and never bothered to move it. "Takes up too much space," she'd mutter whenever someone mentioned it. The other waitresses used it as a place to stack extra napkins and condiment bottles during busy lunch rushes. But Maya saw something different when she looked at that piano. She saw a possibility. During her 15-minute breaks, when the lunch crowd had thinned out and the dinner rush was still hours away, Maya would slide onto the worn wooden bench. She'd run her fingers across the keys without pressing them, feeling the smooth ivory beneath her fingertips. Her hands would move in silent patterns. Playing songs that only existed in her mind, she'd learned to play when she was 8 years old. Her grandmother, Nana Rose, had an old piano in her living room and insisted that every grandchild learn at least the basics. "Music feeds the soul," Nana used to say, her weathered hands guiding Maya's small fingers to the right positions. "Life gets hard. You'll always have music to lean on." Maya had been good at it. Really good. Good enough that her high school music teacher had pulled her aside during senior year and talked about scholarships to the State Music College. Good. Enough that she'd dreamed of concert halls and recording studios instead of coffee shops and diners. But life had other plans. Her father got sick the summer after graduation, and someone needed to help pay the medical bills. College could wait, Maya told herself. Just for a year. Maybe 2 at most. That was 5 years ago. Now, at 23, Maya found herself in a different kind of routine. Wake up at 6, shower, grab a quick breakfast, and head to the diner by 7:30. The morning shift was always the same. Familiar faces, construction workers, grabbing coffee before heading to job sites. Office workers in wrinkled suits rushing to catch the bus, and Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who came in every Tuesday. And Thursday, for scrambled eggs and wheat toast, Maya had memorized everyone's usual orders. She knew that Tom, the electrician, liked his coffee black with exactly 2 sugars. That the woman in the blue suit always ordered a blueberry muffin but never finished it. And that the teenage boy who came in after school would stare at his phone the entire time while picking at a basket of fries. But what none of them knew was that Maya was always listening. Not just to their conversations about weekend plans and work complaints, but to the sounds around them. The rhythmic clink of spoons against coffee cups created a steady beat in her head. The sizzle of bacon on the grill became a melodic hiss. The ding of the cash register turned into punctuation. Marks in an invisible song. She'd started composing in her mind about 6 months ago. It began as a game, really. During slow afternoons, when time seemed to crawl, she'd assign musical notes. 2 different sounds in the diner. The coffee machine's gurgle was a low G. The sound of plates clacking together was a sharp C. The bell above the front door played an E every time someone walked in. Slowly, these random sounds started forming patterns in her head. She'd catch herself humming while she worked, weaving together the daily symphony that surrounded her. The other staff started to notice. "You're always so cheerful," said Danny, the cook who'd been working at Rose's since before Maya was born. "Most people who work here long enough start looking like they've given up on life. But you're always humming some tune." If only he knew that the tune she was humming was the sound of his spatula scraping against the grill, transformed into something beautiful. Maya had tried to recreate her compositions at home on the old keyboard she'd bought at a garage sale. But it wasn't the same. The cheap plastic keys didn't have the weight and response of real piano keys. The electronic sounds felt hollow compared to the rich, warm tones she remembered from Nana Rose's piano and the old upright at the diner, so she'd developed a routine. During her breaks, she'd sit at the piano and play silently, her fingers moving. Through the piece she'd been creating in her mind, she called it Diner Dreams, though she'd never told anyone about it. It started soft and gentle, like the early morning quiet before the first customers arrived. Then it built into the complexity of the lunch rush, with overlapping melodies representing different conversations happening at the same time. It had a middle section that captured the peaceful lull of mid-afternoon, when sunlight streamed through the windows and dust motes danced in the air, and it ended with the warm, bustling energy of dinner time, when families came together and the diner felt most like home. The piece had grown more complex over the months. Maya found herself adding new sections, experimenting with different rhythms and harmonies. She'd worked out intricate passages that her fingers could play even without sound, muscle memory keeping time with the music in her head. Sometimes, when the diner was empty, except for one or two customers absorbed in their newspapers, Maya would press down very gently on the keys, so softly that barely any sound came out, just enough to feel the connection between her fingers and the music. Like whispering to an old friend, she'd always been careful not to actually play. The piano was out of tune, and she didn't want to draw attention to herself. This was her private world, her escape from the reality of sore feet and difficult customers, and dreams that felt further away with each passing day. But lately, Maya had been feeling restless. The silent practice sessions weren't enough anymore. Her fingers itched to press the keys properly, to hear her composition come to life, instead of just existing in her imagination. She'd started staying after her shifts sometimes when the diner was closed and she was supposed to be helping with cleaning. She'd stand next to the piano, her hands hovering over the keys, wanting so badly to just let the music out. What Maya didn't know was that her life was about to change completely. In just a few days, a group of people would walk into Rose's diner, who would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and her place in the world. They would force her to make a choice between safety and dreams, between hiding her talent and letting it shine. But for now, she was just Maya the waitress, wiping down tables and taking orders, carrying a symphony in her heart that no one else could hear. Friday nights at Rose's diner were always busy, but this particular evening felt different from the moment Maya clocked in. The dinner rush had started earlier than usual, and every table was full by 6 o'clock. The kitchen was running behind. Danny was sweating over the grill. Maya's feet were already aching, even though she'd only been working for 2 hours. She was balancing 4 plates on her arms. When she noticed them walk in, a group of 5 people, all dressed in the kind of clothes that screamed money and education. The women wore elegant blouses and designer handbags, while the men had on pressed shirts and expensive-looking watches. They looked completely out of place in the small-town diner, with its cracked vinyl booths and faded wallpaper. Maya seated them at the large corner table near the piano, the only spot big enough for their group. As she handed out menus, she couldn't help but overhear their conversation. They were talking about the local arts scene, using words like provincial and unsophisticated in ways that made Aya's stomach twist. The woman who seemed to be leading the group had silver hair pulled back in a perfect bun and wore glasses that probably cost more than Maya made in a month. Introduced herself as Dr. Victoria Walsh when Maya came to take their drink orders. The others were professors and critics from the university in the next town over, apparently meeting for their monthly dinner to discuss the state of culture in the region. Maya tried to focus on taking their orders, but their conversation kept pulling her attention. They were complaining about everything. The local theater group was amateur at best. The high school's music program was a joke. The town's annual arts festival was an embarrassment to anyone with real taste. "It's such a shame," said one of the men, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. These small towns used to have such rich cultural traditions. Now it's all been replaced by reality TV and social media. Dr. Walsh nodded knowingly. The general public simply doesn't appreciate real artistry anymore. They're content with whatever passes for entertainment these days. Maya felt her cheeks burning as she wrote down their orders. She wanted to say something, to defend her town and the people she served every day. But she was just the waitress, and they were the educated experts. Who was she to argue? As the evening went on, their comments got worse. When Maya brought their appetizers, they were criticizing the local music store owner for trying to organize community concerts. As if anyone in this town could actually play anything worth listening to, laughed one of the women. Then Dr. Walsh's eyes landed on the old piano in the corner. Maya watched as her expression shifted from mild interest to obvious disdain.
Good
Heavens, Dr. Walsh said loudly enough for half the diner to hear. Look at that poor excuse for an instrument. It's probably been sitting there gathering dust for years. I doubt anyone in this entire town could even play chopsticks properly. Conversation at nearby tables started to quiet down. Maya noticed Mrs. Patterson looking uncomfortable at her usual table, and Tom, the electrician, was frowning into his coffee cup. Even Danny had stopped humming in the kitchen. Professor Mitchell, a balding man with a goatee, chuckled. I'm always amazed when these little establishments think having a piano somehow adds class to the place. As if anyone with actual musical training would ever set foot in here, let alone perform. Maya's hands were shaking as she refilled their water glasses. Every word felt like a personal attack, not just on her, but on everyone she cared about. These people didn't know anything about her town or the good people who lived here. They didn't know about Mrs. Patterson, who used to be a music teacher before she retired. They didn't know about the high school kids who worked hard in the school band, or about Maya herself and the music that lived inside her heart. The real tragedy, Dr. Walsh continued, dabbing at her mouth with a napkin, is that these people have no idea what they're missing. They've never experienced the transcendence of truly great music. They're content with their simple little lives and their simple little pleasures. Something inside Maya snapped. She set down the water pitcher with more force than necessary, causing Dr. Walsh to look up with raised eyebrows. Excuse me, Dr. Walsh said, her voice cool and condescending. Is there a problem? Maya opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. What could she say? That she'd been composing music in her head for months. That she'd had a scholarship to music school but gave it up to help her family. That she understood music better than they probably thought possible? I was just wondering, Maya said carefully, her voice steadier than she felt. What makes you think no one here appreciates good music? The question seemed to amuse Dr. Walsh. She exchanged glances with her companions, and Maya could see the barely concealed smirk on her face. Oh, my dear, Dr. Walsh said in the tone people use when talking to small children. I don't mean to be unkind, but let's be realistic. Musical appreciation requires education, training, exposure to the finest compositions and performances. It's not something you can just pick up by listening to the radio. Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks. But what if someone here did have training? What if they knew more about music than you'd think? Now the entire group was looking at Maya with the kind of patronizing amusement that made her want to disappear. Professor Mitchell leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the conversation. Well, he said with a chuckle, I suppose anything's possible. But true musical talent is quite rare. It requires not just technical skill, but also deep understanding of composition, theory, interpretation. It's the kind of thing you'd find in a conservatory or concert hall, not in a... He gestured around the diner place like this. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya could feel everyone in the diner watching, waiting to see what she would do. Danny had appeared in the kitchen doorway, his spatula still in his hand. Mrs. Chen. The owner looked worried from behind the counter. Dr. Walsh seemed to sense that she'd gone too far. But instead of backing down, she doubled down on her position. I don't mean to sound elitist, she said, though her tone suggested she didn't mind sounding that way at all. But there's a difference between someone who can plunk out a few notes and a true musician. Real artistry takes years of dedicated study and natural talent that frankly most people simply don't possess. Maya's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Her palms were sweaty and her mouth felt dry. She looked around the diner at all the faces staring at her, people she'd served coffee to for 3 years. People who knew her as just Maya, the waitress who always had a smile and never complained about difficult customers. What if Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper, "What if someone here could play something that would change your mind?" Dr. Walsh's eyebrows shot up, and she leaned forward with obvious interest. "Are you suggesting that you play the piano?" The question hung in the air like a challenge that couldn't be taken back. Maya felt trapped between her desire to prove these people wrong and her fear of failing publicly. What if her composition wasn't as good as she thought? What if the piano was too out of tune? What if she froze up in front of everyone? But then she thought about Nana Rose and all those hours spent learning to find music in everything around her. She thought about the months she'd spent creating her piece, weaving together the sounds and rhythms of the diner into something beautiful. She thought about all the time she'd sat at that piano during her breaks, her fingers moving silently through the music that lived in her heart. "Yes," Maya said, her voice growing stronger. "I am." The diner erupted in whispers and murmurs. Dr. Walsh sat back in her chair, her expression shifting from amusement to curiosity. The other professors looked skeptical but intrigued, clearly expecting to be entertained by what they assumed would be an amateur's clumsy attempt at impressing them. Maya untied her apron with trembling fingers, her decision made. There was no turning back now. In a few minutes, she would either prove that these people were wrong about her town and its people, or she would confirm everything they believed about small-town mediocrity. Either way, her life was about to change forever. The walk from table 6 to the piano felt like the longest journey of Maya's life. Every step echoed in the suddenly quiet diner, and she could feel dozens of eyes following her movement. Her heart was beating so fast she wondered if everyone could hear it over the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sizzle from the kitchen grill. Maya's hands were shaking as she approached the old upright piano. Up close, it looked even more worn than usual. The wood had scratches and water, stains from years of coffee cups being set on top of it. Several of the keys had chips in the ivory, and she knew from her silent practice sessions that the middle C would stick if she pressed it too hard. She pulled out the wooden bench, its legs scraping against the linoleum floor, with a sound that made her wince. The bench was wobbly. She'd noticed that during her break time sessions, but had never thought much about it. Now, with everyone watching, every imperfection seemed magnified. Behind her, she could hear Dr. Walsh whispering too. Her companions, spoken in tones that made it clear they expected to be entertained by her failure. Maya sat down on the bench and immediately felt how unsteady it was. She adjusted her position, trying to find a spot where she wouldn't rock back and forth. Her uniform felt too tight, and she was suddenly aware of how different she looked from the well-dressed professors watching her. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, held by a rubber band that had seen better days. Her shoes were the practical white sneakers required by the diner. Scuffed from countless shifts, she placed her hands on the keys and felt their familiar texture under her fingertips. These keys had been her silent companions for months, the only witnesses to her secret compositions. Now she was about to break that silence in front of an audience that expected nothing from her. Maya closed her eyes and tried to remember the opening of her piece. She'd played it so many times in her head, her fingers moving through the patterns during countless break sessions. But now, with the pressure of performance, her mind felt blank. What if she forgot how it started? What if her hands didn't remember the movements she'd practiced so carefully? She heard someone in the kitchen drop a pan, and the sudden clatter made her jump. A few people laughed, and she felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. This was exactly what Dr. Walsh and her friends expected. A nervous amateur who couldn't handle the pressure of performing in front of real musicians. Maya took a deep breath and tried to center herself. She thought about Nana Rose, who used to tell her that music wasn't about impressing other people. Music is about truth, Nana had said. When you sit down to play, you're not performing for the audience. You're sharing a piece of your soul. She opened her eyes and looked around the diner. Mrs. Chen was standing behind the counter, her face worried but encouraging. Danny had come out of the kitchen completely, still holding his spatula, his expression curious rather than doubtful. Tom the electrician had turned in his chair to face the piano, his coffee forgotten on the table. Mrs. Patterson was sitting forward in her booth, her hands clasped together. These were her people. If she was going to play for anyone, it should be for them. Maya positioned her fingers on the keys and began. The first note was soft, almost hesitant. The old piano's tone was warmer than she'd expected, even with its imperfections. She'd started with a simple melody, the sound she associated with early morning at the diner, when the first coffee pot was brewing and the world was still quiet. For a moment, her fingers felt stiff and uncertain. The keys were heavier than she remembered, and she had to adjust her touch. Her hands found their rhythm, and the music started to flow. The piece built slowly, just as she'd composed it in her mind. She added the gentle percussion of morning prep work, the soft rhythm of Danny chopping vegetables, translated into delicate staccato notes in her left hand. The melody grew more complex as she layered in the sounds of the diner waking up. Maya began to lose herself in the music. The nervousness that had paralyzed her moments before melted away as her composition came to life. She could hear how the piano's imperfections actually added character to the piece. The slightly flat F-sharp gave certain passages a melancholy quality she hadn't expected. The way middle C stuck for just a fraction of a second created natural pauses that made the rhythm more interesting. She moved into the section that represented the breakfast rush. Her right hand danced across the higher keys, creating the busy chatter of morning customers, while her left hand maintained the steady rhythm of coffee being poured and orders being called out. The music became more energetic, more complex. As layers of sound built on top of each other, Maya had practiced this section hundreds of times in her head, but hearing it played out loud was completely different. The notes bounced off the walls of the small diner, creating harmonic she'd never imagined. The music filled the space in a way that made it feel larger, more important than just a small-town restaurant. She transitioned into the lunch section, where the tempo quickened and the melodies became more urgent. This was the controlled chaos of the midday rush, when orders flew in faster than the kitchen could handle them, and Maya had to balance multiple tables while keeping everyone happy. In the music, this became an intricate dance between her hands, the rapid passages that required every bit of technique she'd learned from Nana Rose years ago. As she played, Maya became aware that the diner had gone completely silent except for her music. No one was talking, no one was moving. Even the kitchen sounds had stopped. She could sense rather than see that people were leaning forward, drawn into the music in a way that surprised her. The piece moved into its quieter middle section, representing the peaceful lull of mid-afternoon. Here, Maya's playing became more introspective, more personal. She'd written this section thinking about her own dreams and the way they felt both within reach and impossibly far away. The melody was simple, but deeply emotional. Carried by the piano's warm middle register, Maya's fingers found expressions she'd never managed to achieve in her silent practice sessions. She discovered that she could make the old piano sing in ways she'd never imagined. The instrument responded to her touch like it had been waiting for someone to finally play it properly. She began building toward the evening section, where the diner came alive with families and friends gathering for dinner. The music grew richer, more complex, as Maya layered melodies on top of each other. Her left hand created a foundation of warm, rolling chords, while her right hand wove intricate patterns that captured the joy and warmth of people coming together at the end of the day. This was the section she was most proud of, where her composition truly became something special. She'd managed to capture not just the sounds of the diner, but the feeling of community, of belonging, of finding beauty in everyday moments. The music swelled and danced, telling the story of ordinary people living extraordinary lives. Maya's hands moved across the keys with increasing confidence. She was no longer thinking about the professors watching her or worrying about making mistakes. She was simply sharing the music that had lived in her heart for so long. Maya knew that whatever happened next, she had already succeeded in ways that mattered most to her. As Maya moved into the final section of her composition, something magical was happening in Rose's diner. The transformation wasn't just in her music. It was in everyone listening. What had started as curious attention had become something deeper. People weren't just hearing notes and melodies anymore. They were experiencing their own lives reflected back to them in sound. Mrs. Patterson, who had been coming to the diner for 15 years, found herself remembering her late husband. Gentle way Maya played the quieter passages reminded her of Sunday mornings when Robert would hum while making breakfast. She hadn't thought about those moments in months, but now they flooded back with surprising clarity. Tom the electrician was thinking about his daughter, who was away at college studying engineering. He'd always regretted that he couldn't afford piano lessons for her when she was younger. She'd asked about them once, maybe twice, but he'd been focused on practical things like saving for her education. Now, listening to Maya play, he wondered what other dreams his daughter might have had that he'd never noticed. Even Danny, who had spent the last 20 years cooking in various restaurants and thought he'd heard every possible sound a kitchen could make, was experiencing his workplace differently. Maya had somehow captured the rhythm of his workday and turned it to art. The way she played the busy sections made him feel proud of the controlled chaos he managed every shift. But the most dramatic change was happening at table 6, where Dr. Walsh and her colleagues sat in stunned silence. Professor Mitchell, who had made the comment about nobody in town being able to play chopsticks properly, was leaning forward with his mouth slightly open. His expertise in classical composition meant he could recognize the sophisticated techniques Maya was using. The way she layered different melodies, the complex harmonies she created with her left hand while her right hand carried the main themes. This wasn't the work of an amateur plinking around on an old piano. Dr. Walsh herself was experiencing something she hadn't felt in years. As someone who had dedicated her life to studying and critiquing music, she had become somewhat numb to its emotional impact. She could analyze a piece technically, discuss its merits and flaws, place it within historical context. But she had forgotten what it felt like to be moved by music, to feel it touch something deep inside her chest. Maya's composition was doing exactly that. The way the young woman captured the essence of community, the dignity of everyday work, the beauty hidden in ordinary moments. It was masterful in a way that had nothing to do with conservatory training and everything to do with genuine, artistic vision. As Maya built toward the climax of her piece, her playing became more confident, more powerful. The old piano, which had sat silent for so long, seemed to come alive under her hands. She was no longer fighting against its imperfections, but incorporating them into her performance. When certain keys rang out longer than others, she used that to create natural sustain effects. When the bench wobbled slightly, she used it to add subtle timing variations that made the rhythm more human, more alive. The final section of Maya's composition told the story of evening at the diner. This was when families came together, when couples shared quiet conversations over dessert, when the day's work was done and people could simply enjoy each other's company. Maya's music captured all of this with a warmth and richness that made everyone in the room feel like they were part of something larger than themselves. Her right hand played cascading melodies that seemed to dance around each other, representing different conversations happening simultaneously. Her left hand provided a foundation of deep, resonant chords that felt like the steady heartbeat of the community. The two hands worked together to create a sound that was both intimate and grand, both simple and incredibly sophisticated. Maya had reached the part of her composition that she'd worked on the longest. This was where all the different themes from earlier in the piece came together in a final, triumphant statement. The morning coffee rhythm, the lunch rush energy, the peaceful afternoon melody, they all wove together into something that was greater than the sum of its parts. As she played this culminating section, Maya felt a freedom she'd never experienced before. For months, this music had existed only in her mind and in her silent finger movements during break times. Now it was filling the air, touching other people, creating connections between her inner world and the community around her. The technical demands of this section would have challenged many trained pianists. Maya's fingers had to move independently, creating multiple melodic lines at once while maintaining perfect timing and dynamic control. But all those months of mental practice, all those break times spent moving her fingers silently over the keys had prepared her perfectly for this moment. She could feel that everyone in the diner was with her now. There was no separation between performer and audience. They were all part of the same experience, the same musical journey. Maya realized that this was what Nana Rose had meant when she talked about music being truth. It wasn't about showing off technical skills or impressing educated critics. It was about sharing something real, something that connected human beings to each other. As Maya approached the final phrases of her composition, she made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of ending with the grand, dramatic conclusion she'd originally planned, she chose to bring the piece back to where it started, with the simple, quiet melody of Early Morning at the Diner. But now that melody carried the weight of everything that had come before. It was the same notes, but they meant something different after the journey they'd all taken together. The last notes hung in the air. For a moment that seemed to stretch on forever. Maya's hands were still on the keys, her foot still on the sustain pedal, letting the final chord ring out until it faded naturally into silence. Then, nothing. The silence that followed wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of people waiting for something to happen. It was the profound silence that comes after something important has been shared. Everyone in the diner seemed to be processing what they'd just experienced, trying to understand how their familiar neighborhood restaurant had been transformed into something magical. Maya sat motionless at the piano bench, her hands still positioned over the keys. She could hardly believe what had just happened. The music she'd carried in her head for so long had finally been born into the world. It was better than she'd ever imagined it could be. The old piano had sung for her in ways she'd never dreamed possible. Slowly, she turned around on the bench to face the room. Every face was looking at her, but the expressions had changed completely from when she'd first sat down. The skepticism and amusement were gone, replaced by something much deeper. Mrs. Chen had tears in her eyes. Danny was shaking his head in amazement, spatula hanging forgotten in his hand. But it was table 6 that Maya found herself looking at most intently. Dr. Walsh was staring at her with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. Wasn't the condescending amusement from earlier? It wasn't even surprise exactly. It was something that looked almost like recognition, as if Dr. Walsh was seeing Maya clearly for the first time. The silence stretched on, filled with possibility and change. Maya knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be quite the same again. The silence lasted for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 seconds. Then, slowly, someone started clapping. It was Mrs. Patterson, her weathered hands coming together in a gentle, steady rhythm. Tom, the electrician, joined in. Then, Danny from the kitchen doorway, still holding his spatula. Within moments, the entire diner erupted in applause. But Maya barely heard it. Her eyes were fixed on Dr. Walsh, who remained seated at table 6, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. The other professors at her table were clapping, looking stunned and impressed. But Dr. Walsh just sat there, staring at Maya with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. Finally, Dr. Walsh stood up. The applause gradually died down as everyone sensed that something important was about to happen. Maya watched as the distinguished professor walked slowly toward the piano, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. When she reached the bench where Maya was sitting, she stopped and looked down at her. "Young lady," Dr. Walsh said, her voice softer than Maya had heard it all evening, "I owe you an apology." Maya felt her cheeks burning. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Dr. Walsh's voice was firm but not unkind. "I came into your workplace tonight and made assumptions about you and your community that were not only wrong but deeply unfair. What you just played, ... She paused, seeming to struggle for words. That was extraordinary. Maya looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly from the performance. "It's just something I've been working on." "Just something?" Dr. Walsh shook her head. "That composition showed a level of musical sophistication that I've rarely encountered, even in professional concert halls. The way you captured the rhythms and patterns of daily life and transformed them into art, ... It was brilliant."
Art.
Professor Mitchell had approached the piano as well. "I have to ask," he said, his earlier smugness completely gone. "Where did you study? What conservatory?" Maya felt her stomach drop. Here it was, The moment when she'd have to admit that she was just a waitress with a high school education and some childhood piano lessons. "I didn't go to conservatory," she said quietly. "I learned from my grandmother when I was little. Everything else I just figured out on my own." The professors exchanged glances. Dr. Walsh sat down on the edge of a nearby chair, bringing herself closer to Maya's eye level. "You're self-taught. That piece you just played, you composed it yourself?" Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. "How long have you been working on it?" "About 6 months. I started just playing around with the sounds I heard at work, and it kind of grew from there." Dr. Walsh was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had a quality Maya hadn't heard before, something almost like wonder. "Maya, is it?"
That's your name?
"Yes, ma'am."
Is
"Maya, I've been studying and teaching music for over 30 years. I've heard compositions by some of the most talented students and professionals in the country. What you just played demonstrates a natural musical intelligence that can't be taught. It either exists or it doesn't, and you have it in abundance." Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She'd dreamed of hearing words like these for so long.
Oh.
But now that they were happening, it felt almost too much to believe. Mrs. Chen approached the group, wringing her hands nervously. "Is everything okay here?" "Maya, you're not in trouble, are you?" Dr. Walsh stood up and turned to face the diner owner. "Trouble? Absolutely not. You have a treasure working for you. Hope you realize that." Maya watched as Mrs. Chun's worried expression transformed into pride. "I always knew Maya was special. She's the hardest worker I've ever had, and she's got such a good heart. She's also got extraordinary talent," Dr. Walsh said. She turned back to Maya. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Have you ever considered returning to school, pursuing formal musical education?" The question hit Maya like a physical blow. How could she explain that she'd thought about little else for the past 5 years? How could she tell them about the scholarship she'd turned down? The dreams she'd put on hold? The way she lay awake at night wondering what her life might have been like if circumstances had been different? Maya started, then stopped. "I had a chance once, right after high school. But my family needed help, and I couldn't." She trailed off, embarrassed by how pathetic it sounded. But Dr. Walsh nodded as if she understood completely. "Life has a way of complicating our plans," Dr. Walsh said gently. "But Maya, talent like yours doesn't have an expiration date. It's never too late to pursue your dreams." Professor Mitchell leaned forward. "Dr. Walsh is right. I teach at the State University, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that you have the ability to succeed at the highest levels of musical study." Maya's heart was pounding. Was this really happening? Were these respected professors actually suggesting that she could still pursue the dream she'd given up on? "But I'm 23, Maya said. "I'm older than most students, and I've been out of school for 5 years. I don't even know if I could handle the academic work." Dr. Walsh smiled, the first genuine smile Maya had seen from her all evening. "Maya, age is just a number. Some of the most successful musicians I know didn't start their formal training until their 20s or even later. What matters is passion, dedication, and raw talent. You've just demonstrated that you have all three." Over the next hour, something remarkable happened. What started as a conversation between Maya and the THS professors gradually expanded to include the entire diner. Mrs. Chen insisted on bringing coffee and dessert to everyone, refusing to accept payment from Dr. Walsh's table. Tom, the electrician, shared that he'd always regretted not encouraging his daughter's musical interests. Mrs. Patterson revealed that she'd been a teacher for 40 years before retiring and offered to give Maya lessons to help prepare for auditions. Danny brought out his phone and played back a video he'd secretly recorded of Maya's performance. "I hope you don't mind," he said sheepishly. "But I had a feeling this was something special, and I wanted to make sure we could remember it." As Maya watched herself on the small screen, playing the piano with complete absorption, she could hardly believe it was real. The person in the video looked confident, talented, artistic. She looked like someone who belonged at a piano, Dr. Walsh exchanged contact information with Maya, and promised to help her navigate the application process for music programs. Professor Mitchell offered to write a recommendation letter and suggested several schools that would be perfect for someone with Maya's unique background and abilities. There are scholarships available, Dr. Walsh explained. Programs specifically designed for students who show exceptional promise but haven't had traditional training. With your talent and the right preparation, I'm confident you could earn a full scholarship. As the evening wound down and the professors prepared to leave, Dr. Walsh took Maya aside one last time. I want you to know something, she said quietly. Tonight you taught me as much as I hope I taught you. I came here with preconceived notions about talent and education and who deserves to be taken seriously as an artist. You showed me how wrong I was. Art isn't about credentials or fancy schools. It's about truth, beauty, and the courage to share your vision with the world. You have that courage, Maya. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. 3 months later, Maya submitted applications to 5 different music programs. 6 months after that, she received acceptance letters from all 5, each offering substantial scholarship packages. A year after her impromptu performance at Rose's Diner, she was enrolled as a sophomore at the State University, studying composition and performance. She still worked part-time at the diner on weekends. Now the old piano was tuned regularly, and she gave short concerts every Saturday evening. The videos Danny had posted online had gone viral, leading to features in local newspapers and even a segment on the regional news. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in Maya herself. She no longer saw her dreams as something that had passed her by. Instead, she understood that every experience, every challenge, every moment of doubt had been preparing her for this new chapter of her life. And sometimes, when she sat at that old piano during her Saturday performances, she could hear Nana Rose's voice reminding her that music truly does feed the soul, both for those who play it and those who listen.